People need to know that their lives mean something. You and I, we need to know that our lives are not accidental, it's not random, it's not just happening to us, but that there is some way to make sense of our lives, our world, and ourselves. We need a story to make sense of our lives. And in the absence of a story, we'll make one up. So my favorite documentary of all time is a Werner Herzog film called The Grizzly Man. Most of the film is just this video diary of the main guy. His name's Timothy Treadwell, and he's out in the wilderness, just him, his camera, and he's talking directly, just stream of conscious, to the camera. Now, get this, here's the storyline, the plot line, if there's one. It's Timothy believes in his heart of hearts that the reason he was put on planet Earth was to, and I quote, save the grizzlies. Now, this sounds reasonable, until you find out his plan on how he's going to do this. So Timothy has concocted this story that he alone can save these 1,200-pound beasts by living with them. Now, I don't mean like close to them. I don't mean in a cabin near them. I mean with them. So the man puts up this flimsy little tent right in the middle of what is called the Grizzly Bear Sanctuary in Alaska. And for 13 consecutive summers, this is what Timothy does. He goes and lives with the bears. We've got some screenshots here of him like talking to the bears. He's just hanging out with them. He actually at one point starts washing with them. He takes a bath with them. He says to him, no, no, no. No, 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 you snotty thing. He gives them pet names. I'm not making this up. Chocolate, Sugar, Downy, Grinch. And then, after 13 summers of giving his life to protect these bears, they eat him. No, don't awe him. Don't awe him. No, this is stupid. No, you don't live with grizzly bears. If someone has to tell you that, something's wrong with you. In fact, throughout the documentary, people tell him over and over again, don't do this. And yet he does. He persists. Why? And this is what makes the documentary go just from like some gorish, fascinating entertainment to something deeper. There's this scene where Timothy's talking with his pet fox, Iris, as one does. And it's just him, Iris, the camera, some bears in the background. And he starts sharing with Iris, well, I wasn't always, all put together like this. He says, at one point, my life was really messed up. He says, I was an alcoholic. I couldn't find a reason to get out of bed. My life was collapsing in on itself. But then I found the grizzlies, and they needed me. They gave my life meaning. His words here, they saved me. Now, I cannot relate to the urge to go live with grizzly bears, but I can see why he did it. He desperately needed to know what we all need to know. He needed to know that his life made sense, that he mattered. He had to believe that there was a purpose, that he was someone. He needed a story to make sense of his life, and in the absence of a story, he made one up. Now, I get that. I see that. I see that in myself, and I see it in you. For years, the story I lived went something like this. If I want my life to have meaning, I have to overperform. I have to do something significant. I have to achieve. If I want to be somebody, if I just want to avoid shame, I have to constantly do something, do the next thing. And so while my story did not literally get me devoured, trying to live that story was eating me alive. And it led me to ignore the danger, ignore the warnings, ignore the breakdowns in my life until my life collapsed into burnout. And then, and only then, was I able to see the truth that the story I was living wasn't saving me, wasn't giving my life meaning. It was consuming me. And if I kept living that story, it was going to be a tragedy. Maybe you know what that feels like too. Maybe you've lived a story like that too. So today we are beginning a series on Exodus. Exodus is fantastic. I'm so excited about this, guys. It's got like these larger-than-life characters: Pharaoh, Moses. It's got these giant world-shaping events like plagues and the Red Sea splitting in two and God descending on Mount Sinai in fire. It's epic in every sense. But if that's all we see, we are missing the best part. God's people down through the ages, when they heard this story, they didn't just hear some ancient story, they heard their story. This is not just some Bronze Age story about how a God named Yahweh saved the Israelites out of Egyptian slavery. It is that, but it is much more. This is the story that forms the identity of God's people down through the ages. This is the story that tells you who you are and who God is, that makes sense of our lives, our world, and ourselves. And here is why this matters so much, especially today. Every single one of us is already living inside of a story, whether we know it or not. You can't not. To stop living by a story is to stop getting out of bed. And you and I, we need stories to make sense of our lives. But when the stories we're living, when they don't line up with reality, when they don't line up with what God says is true, well, it doesn't go well. It ends in slavery. It'll eat you alive. Exodus, though, it offers us another way. It offers us a better story. Not a story that ends in slavery, but a story that ends, get this, takes you to freedom, takes you to rest, real rest, gives you an identity that you can't earn and you can't lose. It invites you to meet the God of the universe who comes after you, who wants to live with you, who wants to dwell in the very center of your life. Exodus is the story that makes sense of all of our stories. Now, I have to say, this is going to take some time. This is only week one. And it's going to take some time for some of this to start to make sense. So if you don't get it after this week, just be patient. Wait for it. This is only week one. So maybe for this week, this is just a fantastic ancient epic. That's all it is to you. That's okay. Let's start there. All right, so we're going to be in Exodus chapter 1, page 44 in your Pew Bible. I would encourage you to grab one, follow along. You're going to want to see this text. Exodus chapter 1, starting in verse 1, begins like this. And these are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his own family. And then it lists them: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. This is the exciting story to the epic, the start of the epic, guys. So what is curious about these opening verses is not what they say, because that's rather boring. It's what they assume. They assume that you know who the sons of Israel are. They assume you remember when and why they went down to Egypt. And in the Hebrew, it's even clearer, and I accidentally actually said it when I went through this. It goes through those names, and then it says, the descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. It assumes you already know who Joseph is and that he's already in Egypt. And when you go back to the very first line in Hebrew, this becomes really, really clear that this is a continuation of something, because the very first word in Hebrew is actually and. And these are the names. That's how the book of Exodus begins. It begins with a conjunction, because it's not the beginning of the story. It's the second part. It's not part one. This is part two. So, do you remember Empire Strikes Back? Remember how that ends? Luke gets his hand chopped off. Hans is frozen in carbonite. Darth Vader's taking over the universe. The rebellion is just destroyed. And then the movie ends. You're like, what just happened? That can't be the ending. See, the story isn't even close to being done, but the movie ends because Return of the Jedi is coming. Mm-hmm. So Genesis is like that. God has made all these massive promises. He says to Abraham, your descendants will be like the numbered like the stars in the heavens. That's how many they will be. But at the end of Genesis, they're not. Just a little group of tribal immigrants over there. God promises, I will give you the promised land. I will bring you into the promised land, this land of milk and honey. But they're not there. They're in Egypt. God says to them, you will be, I will bless to be a blessing. The whole world is going to be blessed through you, but not yet. At the end of Genesis, the rest of the world can hardly stand them. So all these loose ends are just hanging out there, and then the book of Genesis just ends, and you're like, what is that? That can't be the end of the story. It's not the end of the story. Genesis can end because Exodus is coming. So I want you to pay attention to this. If you're going to follow along in this study and you're going to study the text with me, I want you to watch closely in these first few chapters of Exodus, because in here you're going to find it littered with hyperlinks. Links that these phrases, words, phrases, images that link back to the book of Genesis, to creation, to the Tower of Babel, to the promises of Abraham, on and on and on. You're going to find link after link after link. These first few chapters are not meant to be read on their own. They're meant to be a continuation of the story of Genesis. So with that in mind, look at verse 6. Now Joseph, with all his brothers and all that generation, died. But the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful, and they multiplied greatly, increasing in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Now get this language here. This is not your run-of-the-mill baby boom, guys. In Hebrew, if you want to intensify something, there's a word. It's miod. And in miod, it just means, it can be translated like very greatly. Here is exceedingly. They multiplied greatly, that word miod. But in this text, it's saying, it takes that word, and if you really want to intensify something, it's not just miod, it's miod. So these people, get this, they're not just being fruitful and multiplying. They're not just having babies. They're having miod babies. The whole land is filled with them. In fact, that language could literally be translated swarming, teeming with them. This is the language that you would usually reserve for things like a plague of grasshoppers. A school of tuna, wildebeest covering the face of the earth. This is the language they're using. Like, these Israelites are having so many babies that the land was filled with them. Now, we live in an era in which the birth rate is precipitously dropping. Kids are primarily viewed as an expense. So I get it. This sounds overwhelming. Can you imagine having 12 children? Like, I can hardly breathe. Think how much it would cost for all of them to go to Penn State. But in the ancient Near East, in a world where mothers and babies regularly died in childbirth, in a world, real statistic, 1 out of every 2 children did not make it to the age of 12. In that world, this is viewed as an unmitigated blessing from God. God is at work. God is blessing his people. That's what this is. In fact, this is one of the hyperlinks to Genesis right here. So get the picture. This is the picture of the earth teeming, swarming with new life. It's just covered, crawling, filled. And this language, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. This language is swiped straight out of Genesis 1. This is the creation blessing. This is the creation mandate. These are the exact same words. And that is the point. The Israelites are not just having a bunch of babies. They are experiencing a Garden of Eden, naked and unashamed. God saw that was good. It's kind of blessing. God's original intent for humanity and creation itself is the breaking out in their midst. Now, unfortunately, though, the Egyptians don't quite see it the same way. Verse 8. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Literally, this reads, it gives you a little different sense of this. There arose a new king who knew not Joseph. Now, get the way the Hebrew works here. That word know in Hebrew has a different depth to it than just cognitive knowledge. So this is the same word that is used in Genesis chapter 4, hyperlink, where it says Adam knew his wife Eve and she conceived. And I'm guessing he knew knew more than like her height and weight if she conceived after knowing her, right? So there's a depth of knowing that can be relational, committed, giving yourself to one another. And so when Joseph first came down to Egypt, him and Pharaoh, the dynasty of Pharaoh, they had a relationship, a trusting relationship, and that went on for generations, even after Joseph, where the people of God, the people of Joseph, had a relationship with Pharaoh. But then there arose a new king, arose a new dynasty who wanted nothing to do with Joseph or his people. That's the sense. Now, there is a historical connection that I don't want to get lost in, but I think it might help us more appreciate the ominous tone of this verse. So in the same way that racism in America, if you're going to understand it at all, you have to know something about like American slavery, Civil War, Civil Rights Movement. In the same way, if you want to understand the Egyptian sentiment towards the Israelites, it's helpful to know something about a people called the Hyksos. So here's the backstory. Sometime prior to this, arguably, I think, almost certainly, during the time period when the Israelites lived in the land of Goshen in Egypt, for about 100-year period during that time, the northern portion of Egypt was ruled by foreigners. Now, so we don't know that much about these people, except you can see from the picture, they're bearded. Egyptians aren't bearded. They're shepherds. Egyptians don't do sheep. And they're from Canaan, just like the Israelites. The Egyptians called them the Hyksos. So later Egyptian records will then consider this period of the Hyksos rule as the Dark Ages. Like this is the time when Egypt was subject to these filthy, ignorant shepherds. But then, get this, in the year around 1550 BC, there arose a new dynasty, a king named Ahmose I, who expelled the Hyksos, expelled those foreigners, reunited like northern and lower and upper Egypt, northern and southern Egypt, put it all, they're all now under purebred Egyptian rule, and he made Egypt great again. Yeah. Now, please hear me. The Hyksos are not the Israelites. These are a different people group that left Egypt at a different time. And we cannot be sure that this new Pharaoh referred to in the text is Ahmose I. But chewing on this historical fact from ancient Egypt gives us a taste of how the Egyptians felt about this massive population growth of these bearded, sheep-herding Semitic immigrants in the north. Verse 9. "Look," Pharaoh said to his people, "the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, they'll join our enemies against us and leave the country." So you can hear in this seething fear, disgust for the Israelites. And let me connect this with the book of Genesis. This has been brewing for a long, long time. So if you go back to the passages at the end of Genesis where Joseph brought God's people into Egypt for the first time, you read things like Genesis 44:32. "Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that was detestable to the Egyptians." Genesis 46:34. "For all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians." Now, what is it that the Israelites do for a living? Oh yeah, that's right, they're shepherds. So even the way the Egyptians speak of the Israelites suggests some racism is going on here. It has this racist edge to it. So the word Hebrew, well, there is technically nothing wrong with that word. It means descendants of Eber. You can find this in Genesis. Technically nothing wrong with it, but on the lips of Egyptians, it almost certainly is a racial slur that means something like a lower class or less than. Now, this is curious because you're going to find this throughout, like over and over again. The Egyptians and then later Babylonians will refer to the Israelites as those Hebrews, and it's like a cuss word, or like a racial slur. But you will find at the same time, God does not like ban that term or back away from it. You know what he does instead? He embraces it. He says, "I am the God of the Hebrews. I'm the God of the lowly. I'm the God of the brokenhearted. I'm the God of the powerless. Isn't that something? Now, I want to update this picture a little bit because this can be hard for us to really appreciate what's happening in the text. So imagine, if you will, imagine like this pristine Egyptian family, upper middle class, good-looking kids, clean-shaven, all decked out, and they decide, let's go out for dinner to our favorite little spot along the Nile, huh? So they take the family out, they sit down at their table, and they open up the menu, and they're like, what is this? Half the menu is in Egyptian, and half is now in Hebrew. Oh! They're like, okay, well, this is our favorite place. Let's just eat here. And then the waiter comes over, and he can hardly speak Egyptian. He's got this big old beard, and they're like, he messes up their order because he clearly doesn't understand what they're saying. They're like, this is disgusting. And just when they're like, we can't take it anymore, just then this Israelite family comes in. Them, mom, dad, and their 12 kids. Yeah, they all like stink, like reek like sheep, and the dad's got this big old beard with like things crawling in it, and they're all speaking that Hebrew, which sounds like, they think, are they hacking something up or speaking? Like they're disgusted by it, and they go back, let's talk to the manager. But the manager, he's Hebrew too, got the big old beard. They open up the kitchen, it's full of Hebrews. They walk out the front door, Hebrews are everywhere. What's happened to this country? That's what they're experiencing. And Pharaoh, he feels like he has to manage this Hebrew situation. He has to take control of this. So he comes up with a political solution. Verse 11. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Raamses as store cities for Pharaoh. I want you to notice, what did they build? Store cities. They did not build the Great Pyramids, as some might suggest. In fact, the pyramids were hundreds of miles away, and the pyramids were ancient when the Israelites showed up in Egypt, right? So way before their time. Instead, they're working on Pithom and Raamses. Here's a map of Egypt, just to give you some sense of it. There's the upper and lower. The lower is actually to the north because it goes downhill of the Nile. And so the Israelites were living in that delta region of the Nile, and they think Pithom and Raamses are those two little dots on the map there on the kind of the eastern edge of the delta. If you want to nerd out on this, I would highly recommend you check out the Egyptologist James Hoffmeyer. He's brilliant. He's got all kinds of lectures on YouTube, and he will tell you way more than you ever wanted to know about it. Okay? So these are store cities, and they likely look like, not like pyramids, but they likely look like something like this. This is the Ramesseum, which is the burial site of Raamses II from the 18th dynasty, who some think might even have been the king, the Pharaoh of the Exodus. If you notice, in the center there is where he's buried, this giant monument to his greatness. But then around it are like all these buildings. In fact, there are 80 storage units around them. Here's a close-up to show you. They were built with mud brick. Now, why did you need such huge storage cities around this monument? Get this, these were not storage cities for the people. These were for Pharaoh. See, he believed that he would live forever as a god, and so he needed people to have enough food forever to come bring him food offerings. So in his lifetime, he had this built with all these storage cities around it so that for eternity to come, people could come and worship him, bringing food offering. This is what they think that Pharaoh was forcing the Israelites to do. Curious. So in order to provide for his own worship, this new king, he oppresses, that's the word there, he oppresses the Israelites. And here we run into an important Hebrew word. It's the word Anah. Say this with me. Anah. Anah, yeah. It is not a pleasant word, but it's an important one in the text. It means to oppress, to do violence, to humiliate, to abuse, to rape. It is sad, violent, and dehumanizing. And what makes it so powerful is that it's one of those words that sounds like what it means. Anah is not just a word, it's the sound you make when you are crushed and there's nothing you can do about it. Anah. Verse 12. But the more they were anawed, the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So this brings us to something curious. Have you ever heard of the term militant fecundity? Or maybe a little more familiar, wombfare as opposed to warfare? So it's a political concept that, like, if you are in the minority and you want to take over the world, all you really need to do is have more babies than everyone else. That's what that means. So if you and your friends have more babies than your neighbors, then eventually you and your friends will become the majority. And in this way, having babies becomes a political act, an act of resistance, a subversive way to push back against the wider culture. Now, before you ask me, no, the baby boom news story is not part of our secret strategy to take over the world. It's not. Your militant fecundity is all on you. Yeah, you guys just can't keep your hands off each other, so yeah. Okay, but that being said, there's actually some truth to this. In his classic study, The Rise of Early Christianity, the sociologist Rodney Stark explains that one of the reasons that this tiny sect of Jesus followers from Palestine could take over the entire Roman Empire in less than 300 years is pretty simple. They had more babies. So Romans would often practice infanticide, especially so if you had a baby and it was weak, small, or a girl, they would just take that baby, they would set it out with the trash and let it die of exposure. But get what these subversive, tricky Christians would do. You would set out your baby to die, and they would come by and pick up that little girl and bring her home and make them part of their family. And you do that again and again and again. And soon, Christians start outnumbering the Romans, and through loving babies, you've overturned the empire. Now, we have no reason to believe that the Israelites are intentionally performing wombfare here in order to overthrow Pharaoh, but that's clearly how he's reading this. Watch how he responds. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor and brick and mortar, with all kinds of work in the fields. And all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. They say it twice. It's really, really, really bad. 1830-something archaeologists unearthed this. This is the tomb of Rekhmire. Rekhmire was an 18th century vizier. He was the second in command only to Pharaoh, which is interesting from a biblical standpoint. That's the exact same position that Joseph had hundreds of years prior. So his job was to oversee the work projects of Pharaoh at the time. And if you go into his tomb, there are these ornate scenes portraying the projects he oversaw, and they're full of, get this, of foreigners pressed into hard labor, worked ruthlessly, making mud bricks while the Egyptian slave masters stand there with a big stick. So if you zoom in, you can see him making mud bricks, and that guy right there is holding a big stick to make sure they keep working hard. Yeah. This is a long-used tactic of Pharaoh, and this seems to be the preferred tactic for this. But here's the thing. For some reason, it's not working on the Israelites. It's not slowing them down, so he decides to take a more direct approach. Verse 15. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose name were Shiphrah and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him, but if it is a girl, let her live. Now this is, there's, Carmen Imes is a Old Testament Hebrew expert currently writing a commentary on the book of Exodus, and in her commentary on this passage, she points out that Pharaoh, here's what you need to know. Men in ancient Egypt were never, ever, ever part of the birthing process. Never was dad invited with his video camera to come into the birth room. That wasn't a thing back then, right? So Pharaoh right here, he would know practically nothing about the birthing process. And in the Hebrew, she says, it really shows. The man has no idea what he's talking about, because she says, this is what it sounds like literally. So when you're doing that woman thing with Hebrew women, on the stool thing and babies and stuff, if it's a boy, they kill him. If it's a girl, let him live. So this is dark humor. He has no idea what he's talking about, but he's trying to mansplain it to these midwives. Now, we aren't quite sure why he only wants to kill the boys. Some think it might be because he's trying to do away with the potential for a standing army. Others think that he's trying to raise these little girls for his harem. So we know historically that Raamses II, who potentially a pharaoh of that time period, had an enormous harem of women, and maybe he was looking to collect a few hundred more. Verse 17. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. And this is impressive. Their very lives are on the line. Pharaoh, in an instant, can have them executed if he even just suspects that they might be disrespecting him in any way. And still, they refuse to obey because they feared God. They feared God more than what they feared Pharaoh could do to them. This is like some Hebrews 11 Hall of Faith type of courage. This is impressive. But I want you to notice they're not just courageous, they're going to be shrewd. So in verse 10, Pharaoh said, we need to be shrewd with the Israelites. We need to be wise in how we manage this situation. And these women, they're going to deal it right back to him. Verse 18. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? The midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. Okay, this is supposed to be funny. Yeah. So in Hebrew, the word vigorous could mean vigorous. These are stout women. They just have babies and boom, keep on moving. It could mean that, but the exact same word could be translated wild animals. In Genesis chapter 1, it's translated wild animals. So get this, get what's going on here. When it becomes obvious to the midwives that Pharaoh thinks of them as nothing more than wild animals, and he has no idea how Hebrew women actually have babies, they just say to him, well, you know, these Hebrew women, they're like wild animals. They just squat down by the side of the road, pop out a baby, and go back to work. We can't even catch up with them. Yes, they're mocking him. They're exploiting his ignorance. They're making him look ridiculous. So get what's happening here. There's this contrast, this battle between Pharaoh and Shiphrah and Puah. And here's Pharaoh on the one hand. He is a king. He is the wealthiest, most powerful man in the world. He literally thinks he's a god, and he's so powerful that no one will question him. And on the other hand, we get Shiphrah and Puah, two poor, powerless slave women, and they school him. So this is funny, but it's more than funny. This shows us how God works. He delights to use the foolish things to confound the wise. So from the very beginning, this is a hyperlink here. From the very beginning, Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, what is known as the proto-evangelion, the first hint of the gospel in the scriptures. From that very verse, we discover that women, who are often voiceless and powerless in our world, are going to play a key role in God's work of salvation, specifically through childbearing. Now, I know we live in a day that devalues childbearing, that thinks it's like second best or less than. But according to God, the act of creating and nurturing another human being is arguably the greatest thing that anyone can be part of. It is profound, and it is holy, and it is good, and it is not secondary. And from the beginning, God promises that it will be through a son of Eve, that through this most human, most basic, most miraculous act of childbearing, that salvation will come. So more on that next week. Here, all I want you to see is that from the very beginning, women play a key role in God's work. And then it also shows us something else. It not only shows us how God works, it shows us that God does not value what this world values. So notice Pharaoh. He is the most important person in the world. Everyone wants to know him. He's the most powerful man in the world. He's the one who thinks he's a god, and yet, in this text, in the entire book of Exodus, he never gets named. Because he's just not that important to God. But Shiphrah and Puah, God knows them by name. They matter. He says, I know them by name, and you need to know them by name. They matter to me. They're important to what I'm doing in the scope of all human history. In fact, we don't have to guess how God feels about them. Look at verse 20. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. So get this. Pharaoh, plan A backfired. Plan B was just embarrassing. What's next? He says, plan C, verse 22. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all the people. Every Hebrew boy that is born to you must be thrown into the Nile, but let every girl live. Here, sitting in relative safety, prosperity, freedom. This is hard to believe. It's hard to believe that people could be so filled with fear and hatred that they would actually do something like this to other people, to babies. Years ago, I went to visit missionaries in Cambodia, and they said, Paul, if you want to understand Cambodia and Cambodian culture, you have to see this. And they took me here to what are called the killing fields. It's in these fields that in the late 1970s, everyone who is a minority, everyone who is old, everyone who is a professional or deemed intellectual, like doctors, lawyers, professors, get this, anyone who wore glasses because they looked smart, they were taken to these fields and executed. 1.3 million people were executed in these fields. If you go there today, you can still see fragments of their clothing and their bones popping up through the ground. They collected all the skulls they could find, and they had to build multi-story cases just to display them. And this happened in living history, living memory. So it almost seems unbelievable that someone could be so filled with fear and hatred that they would do such a thing. And yet, if you know history at all, you know that this type of thing has happened again and again and again and again and again. And this is how chapter 1 ends. Thousands of baby boys floating lifelessly down the Nile. Anah! Tens of thousands of parents and grandparents and sisters screaming at the top of their lungs, Anah! And nothing. Not yet. There's no response. There's no miracle. There's no reversal. Just Anah. So what are we supposed to make of this? Do you know what step number 1 is in the 12-step recovery program? You know what that is? Let me tell you. Step number 1, you must admit that you are powerless and that your life has become unmanageable. You must admit, I cannot save myself. And that is what Exodus 1 is. Now we might wish that Exodus began differently with like self-help talk and, some montage where they get together and they're going to defeat Pharaoh and, it's all going to come together if we just work hard enough. But that's not where it starts. It doesn't. It begins with powerlessness, with loss, with grief, with this terrible, terrible word, Anah. This can be hard to take in. In fact, I'm guessing that this is why so many of us continue to live by these stories that we make up for ourselves, because we don't want to live this story. We don't want to face Anah. We don't want to come to a place where we're powerless. So like Adam, we sew together fig leaves so that we can hide behind our productivity or our helpfulness or our career or our money or our looks or something. If I'm just good enough, if I'm just helpful enough, if I'm just funny enough, quirky enough, if I just move to Alaska and live with grizzly bears, then I won't have to face the truth that I'm powerless and I can't save myself and much less you. But if you keep living that story long enough, how's that working for you? So Exodus, it does not hide from the truth. It begins with the cries of slaves, with children who drowned in the Nile, with Anah, this utter powerlessness. And this tells us something that we rather avoid. This is where salvation begins. Not with our strength, not with our brilliance, not with working hard, not with control. Salvation begins with admitting, I can't do it. Now, if you're like, really, Paul, powerless? Come on. You read some self-help books. We've got this. Anderson, you lost me here. We're not slaves. We're Americans. I get it. We live in this obscene amount of like political, personal, and economic freedom. We really do, and God bless America for it. I'm really thankful for it. But this kind of freedom can hide the fact that there is a deeper slavery in our world. In John chapter 8, Jesus, some people come to him and say, hey, we're not slaves to anyone. And literally, politically, that's true. You know what Jesus has the audacity to say to them? Everyone who sins is a slave to sin. No, you're slaves. So that anxiety you can't turn off, did you really choose that? That insecurity you can't shake that you're constantly acting out of? Is that from your freedom? That pressure to impress, to please other people, to pretend that you're someone you're not? Does that come from freedom? Those secret little addictions that only you and God know about. That porn, that doom scrolling, that Ben and Jerry's, that need to constantly be busy, whatever it is. Were those born out of freedom? Is that who you really want to be? Everyone who sins is a slave to sin. This is not just a metaphor. This is our spiritual condition. But thankfully, Jesus doesn't stop there. He goes on to say, but if the Son sets you free, you are free indeed. And this is where we discover this beautiful paradoxical truth that our only true hope is to give up all hope of saving ourselves. Our only true hope is to give up all false hopes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Why? Because when you cry out, Anah, then you're ready to experience the work of God in your life. Because when you cry out, Anah, then and only then are you ready for a Savior. And that's chapter 2. And that's the good news. This story doesn't end with Anah. It starts with Anah. And the same God who hears Israel's cries hears yours. The same God who saw their slavery sees yours. The same God who sent Moses after the Israelites sent his one and only Son after you. And if the Son sets you free, you're free indeed. Exodus isn't just their story, it's yours, or it could be. If you're ready to admit your powerlessness, then you're ready to meet your Savior.